Hello, in this video I'm going to explain 5 ways to boost participation amongst your students in the written roundtable. The first is by asking open-ended questions. It seems a little bit obvious, but there's a few reasons why it's really important to ask open-ended questions as much as possible in the written discussions, because it really allows for students to get to higher order thinking, but also allows them to share their own unique ideas and insights. And of course, when they're doing that, they're a little bit more engaged. That's also going to lend well for discussion. So when students are going and giving feedback to each other, there's going to be a little bit more nuance for them to actually have that discussion. So if we look at an example here, here's a poetry analysis. We can go down here to the bottom and see that there's actually 3 open-ended questions. If you decided to use all 3, you could, but each one is really asking students about their own interpretation of this poem. So what is Tupac trying to tell us about fate or society? Can you relate to the rose? In what way? Feel free to share a story of overcoming adversity. And then third, what is the relationship between struggle and success, and does it have to be this way? So really, when we're getting to those final questions, they're almost becoming more broad, more towards the essential questions, but that's going to allow for the best discussion. If your students aren't necessarily ready for that, you could start by asking kind of knowledge-based questions, maybe asking them to pick a word from the poem, or ask them to describe one element of the content that we're discussing today before we get to those higher order thinking questions. But it's certainly really helpful to get students engaged. Next is to set peer feedback expectations. So there's a few ways you can do this, but ultimately it's providing students with really clear directions on what they should be doing once they submit their initial response. So what a lot of teachers do is they'll say, respond to at least 2 others in the discussion. But if you wanted to be a little bit more specific, you can have them ask one question, or challenge an idea, or agree with someone in the discussion. Another way that you could do it is you could ask students to be the first commenter on a particular post, be the second commenter on another post, joining in the thread, and perhaps even being a third commenter on another post. And so you're really encouraging that deeper dialogue in the individual discussion threads that are going to go in many different directions based on the original response that student submitted. Of course, it's really important to clarify these expectations in the peer feedback section of the original discussion prompt. This makes it really obvious for students when they're writing their own idea, so they get a sense of how others are going to be commenting on their ideas, but also allows them to reference back as well. So that's the peer feedback section just at the bottom of your discussion prompt. Now, of course, you can always change up those peer feedback questions as well. If you wanted them to be asking questions, or if you wanted them to be asking for evidence or looking for connections between ideas, use these peer feedback questions and sentence stems to really guide that again. Next is to remind students to actually reply in the comments. Sometimes this can get lost as the discussion's happening, especially if it's happening synchronously and there's a lot going on. But even just pausing the class and reminding students partway through, hey, you can go and actually reply to other people's comments and continue that discussion thread. So again, sometimes students don't realize that they could respond to comments as well. So for example, if I wanted to respond to Pablo Picasso, I can click reply and go and reply directly to them. So students sometimes just might need a little reminder for that. All right, next is starring student submissions. So there's so many ways that you could use this feature. So when you're inside of the roundtable, you can mark any submission as a model submission by just clicking the little star beside that particular post. So for example, if I wanted to really draw attention to this particular post that Mikhail Lomonosov wrote, then I can click that, and it's going to open up a text box where I can highlight a little bit more about why I want to draw attention to this. So, maybe this post specifically was structured in the exact way that I asked the class to. I could say, look at the way that this student structured it. Or I could say, look at this great use of evidence. Maybe even, hey, can some students go and give the student feedback? They don't have any comments yet. Or alternatively, maybe, this is a great discussion thread and we're going to be talking about this in class tomorrow. So once you write a little note, you don't have to, you just click mark as a model submission. All the students are going to get that notification in the top corner. And then of course in your list and in the feed, you're going to see that post marked with the star. And last but not least, it's really helpful to pause and reflect at any point in the roundtable to just have students think about their own participation, how they might be able to improve, and maybe even how the class can improve. So one way of doing this is, of course, you just click the summary tab. You'd open this up and I might say, okay, everybody look up here on the board. We're going to look at some of the data before we finish. Looks like everybody submitted a response. That's really great, but only 67% of us gave at least one comment and only 50% received at least one comment. So maybe can everybody please go find a response that has 0 comments on it and see if we can give them some feedback and get these numbers all to 100. Alternatively, we could draw attention to the average comment length. Maybe we want to encourage students to be writing longer comments, or maybe down in the comment cord below, we might want to encourage more back and forth communication. So I might say, hey, if you got a response to your initial idea, go and reply to that person and continue the conversation so that students are becoming more aware that they're not just, here to respond to 1 or 2 comments, but they're here to actually continue the conversation as well. Of course, this is going to encourage that back and forth communication a little bit more and engage students in that deeper dialogue beyond simply responding to 1 or 2 comments. Alrighty, and those are 5 different ways that you could boost participation in the written roundtable. If you have any ideas, feel free to let us know, and we'd be happy to hear it.